Welcome back. Increase in concern over the East-West war in Crimea has led the U.S. to warn Russia against any provocation. The situation, which has become deadly over the past few days, is expected to escalate, with Moscow warning that there will be dire consequences in Crimea continues its appointment of the new cabinet. Barbara Starr reports that the situation is delicate.
Chuck Hagel at NATO headquarters, suddenly the Cold Warrior.
I'm closely watching Russia's military exercises along the Ukrainian border.
Warning Moscow.
I expect Russia to be transparent about these activities, and I urge them not to take any steps that could be misinterpreted or lead to miscalculation during a very delicate time, a time of great tension.
March.
So far, Russia has not moved significant forces off their bases near the Ukraine border. But by the weekend, the U.S. expects nearly 150,000 Russian troops conducting war games close to that border. If, and it's a big if, Russian President Vladimir Putin were to order his troops into Ukraine, they could move in so quickly the U.S. might not know right away it's happening. One U.S. official telling CNN, our warning time is cut to 0. And that makes it impossible for last-minute U.S. diplomatic pressure. So it's a full-court press now to make sure Russia doesn't go back on its promise to respect Ukraine's sovereignty.
We believe that everybody now needs to step back and avoid any kind of provocations. And we want to see in the next days ahead, obviously, that the choices Russia makes conform to this affirmation.
The U.S. intelligence assessment, Putin is sending a message to the U.S. and Ukraine that his military still has the capability to invade if he orders it, and that he is not willing to lose Russian influence over Kiev. The U.S. does not expect a wholesale Russian invasion. It believes Moscow knows that would provoke a massive security crisis. But what happens if Russia just sends a few troops across the border? What then? Barbara Starr, CNN, The Pentagon.
Still on the crisis in Ukraine, ousted President Viktor Yanukovych has resurfaced in Rostov-on-Don, Russia, says after disappearing from his country. Yanukovych has said that he fled Kiev for his life was in danger by the forces who want to take over the country. And as we hear in the CFI report, he's still insisting that he is in power and will not give up at any cost.
Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych has reappeared in the southern Russian city of Rostov-on-Don. Yanukovych had disappeared after being ousted by a popular uprising last week. He gave a long-awaited press conference from Russia Friday in which he said he would not give up the fight for the future of his country, which he said had fallen into the hands of neo-fascists. Yanukovych said he had been forced from power and spoke of the irresponsible attitude of Western nations. He said that the events taking place in Crimea were a natural reaction to a coup. Crimea, with its majority ethnic Russian population, has been the scene of utter confusion. The new authorities in Kiev accused Moscow of invading Ukrainian territory after armed men took control of 2 Crimean airports. Some of the men wore uniforms with no insignia. I'm not sure who they are, just armed people. But they helped us to establish security. They took the territory under control. Russia on Friday denied having anything to do with the takeover of the airports of Sebastopol and Simferopol. And later, a high-ranking Ukrainian official said the airports in Crimea were once again under the control of the official authorities. Meanwhile, faced with a looming crisis in eastern Ukraine, the new interim president launched a solemn appeal. We are appealing to the Russian Federation to stop moves that show signs of undermining the national sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and reject support for separatism in Ukraine in any form. The same sentiments were expressed by France, Germany and Poland, which reaffirmed their support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine.
French President François Hollande is in Bangui for the second time in 3 months to visit French troops in the Central African Republic. The French Parliament has increased the mandate of the troops to another 3 months to maintain some semblance of order in the country besieged by religious cleansing. We have details in the CFI report.
French President François Hollande arrived in Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic, on Friday to visit 2,000 French troops whose mission to stop deadly sectarian violence was just extended by the French National Assembly. After 3 months, the French troops, along with 6,000 soldiers from the African Union, seized over 10 tons of weapons from both sides, the mainly Muslim Seleka rebel group and the anti-Balaka militias. The French president said it shows that progress has been made.
We must stop revenge killings, re-establish the authority of the government, and allow it to resume talks, and to avoid any attempt to divide the country in the east.
After he visited the French troops, François Hollande met with the interim Central African president, Catherine Samba Panza, who thanked him for his help. Religious leaders in the country have been trying for weeks to stop the sectarian violence, but without success.
We would like to reiterate our desire to continue to go against the flow and to say that this country is a secular country. The most important thing is to live together.
But the massacres continue throughout the country, with Muslims fleeing from the Christian militias. The UN Refugee Agency chief visited the country and warned Friday that ethno-religious cleansing was occurring and that the situation is extremely dire.
I have been working in UNHCR now for more than 22 years, and it's one of the most, if not the most difficult place I have been, and it reminded me the early days of my position in Gorazde and Srebrenica of the Muslim enclaves in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The violence is as tough and the situation of the people is extremely dire.
250,000 Muslims have fled to neighboring countries, Chad and Cameroon, and 1 million Central Africans have been displaced within the country.
And before we take leave of you, a quick reminder of the day's top stories. The President, His Excellency Sheikh Professor Alhaji Dr. A.J.J. Jammeh, has called for a cultural renaissance in Africa as a matter of urgency to place the continent on a sound development trajectory. Viktor Yanukovych has turned up in Rostov-on-Don, Russia, days after his ousting in crisis hit Ukraine, and tensions between East and West. The Obama White House has warned the Kremlin against any provocation of Ukraine, urging Moscow to respect the sovereignty of Kiev. That was all in this edition of the news. From me, Winifred Nicole Hadibat, and the rest of the team, thanks for the pleasure of your company, and do stick with Grts.
muy kam bon kayintino radiade television ti Gambia woli koku de safu de programme ti kami ku jamat ni mahu kanu no san pambu teblu wabajomi nu teblu ajabru ngolal ban pon luwal woto